All right, it's just about 4 o'clock. Hey Luke, how are you?
All right, good.
Good. Excited to be kicking off our third and final, not excited that it's the final, but third and final of our webinar series. We have LaChina Robinson, JP Abercrumbie, and Tony Jones joining us today. And before we get started, I just wanted to first thank all the participants for joining us and explain a little bit about how we got here today and the evolution of the 3 episodes of our series so far. So obviously the intention is to try to talk about name, image, and likeness, student athlete education around name, image, and likeness, beyond personal branding. We know a lot of schools are coming out with announcements about personal branding help. We want to make sure that there's broad awareness about all the other education that goes along with that. So we kicked off the first week to talk very broad curriculum, what a curriculum for NIL might look like. We had Seth Greenberg join us and Joey Galloway. They both had very similar concerns and also aspirations for how this possibly could help student athletes. But one of the things that they shared in terms of their concerns were just the idea that this could possibly pull away attention to the student athletes' classes and their sport, the two most important reasons that they're there. And as Joey said, having gone on to the NFL, he said, when he was 18 years old at Ohio State, his biggest concern was where to eat lunch and where his first class was. And having gone on to the NFL, imagining 18-year-olds now having to deal with what he dealt with as a professional player after he had had time to mature is concerning for him. He's concerned that the representatives that are going to be working with these student athletes, doing their deals, helping them market or whatever they're helping them do they even make money on transactions and not necessarily always have the athlete's best interest at heart. Seth Greenberg, obviously former coach, always a coach. He sort of capped off why I think anybody who gets into secondary education gets into it, especially those who get into student athlete development. And that is that, really hoping that there's a team there to help the student athlete decide what's most important for them individually in that moment. And not just in that moment, but for short-term, long-term, and hopefully the rest of their life. Second week, we moved into a little bit more detailed focus around coaching and how coaches may view name, image, and likeness. So we had Clark Kellogg and Chris Holtman from the Ohio State men's basketball team. And Chris, everybody knows, has been a long supporter of name, image, and likeness. So he's really focused on, what do we do with this now? He said that within the group, within his team, they've talked about how there's a potential concern about time management, but he really thinks that student athletes will figure that out. He was more focused on how do we monitor the market value? What is that market value and how do we monitor it? And I think that that speaks strongly to being able to educate the student athlete. And it brings us to today. We were originally going to try to tailor today's conversation around compliance. But given the last 2 weeks and how much emphasis there's been on really helping these student athletes, we decided it was much better to have a very student athlete development driven discussion. So really happy that JP Abercrumbie is joining us from Rice University. She is head of student athlete development across all 16 varsity sports. Prior to Rice, spent some time at Mississippi State, Cal Berkeley, ran track at Temple here in Philly. And Tony Jones, who is the director of high school recruiting at the University of Michigan football. Tony's an excellent resource for all student athletes and their families. And he also was a stellar student athlete, standout receiver at Northwestern, went on to the NFL for a period of time, and is now working with Coach Harbaugh and his great team at University of Michigan. With that, I will turn it over to Luke.
Yes, so if everyone wants to bring their cameras on and unmute themselves, I just want to say thank you to everyone who was able to join us today. I know people are still continuing to log in, and I'm excited because I get to introduce my fellow Demon Deacon from Wake Forest University, LaChina Robinson. And if you don't already know, LaChina's former women's basketball player at Wake Forest University, dear old Wake Forest. and she spent time at Georgia Tech in their athletic department. She's an ESPN analyst, reporter. She has her own company, Stretch Beyond. And she also is just a highly regarded keynote speaker, moderator, facilitator of conversations. But most importantly, she's a great person, just like JP and Tony. I'm glad all of you are here with us on the call today. But I have to just turn things a little bit, LaChina, because I know you're our moderator for the day. And I know that as an analyst and reporter, you're the one that's used to asking questions. But I'm going to start off, kind of just kick this off with the first question to you, which is what's your perspective on name, image, and likeness? Having been a former student athlete and now spending so much of the rest of your professional life so far around the college sports, kind of what are your thoughts just on name, image, and likeness, opportunities, concerns? What do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Luke, and thank Courtney for having me. And thank you to JP and Tony for your time, and Bruce and Rashad, who aren't on this panel, but are a big part of both of your teams at Anomaly and Altemus. We appreciate the work that you're doing. I was really excited about this conversation because this gives me a chance to revisit my days of working in athletic administration. As you mentioned, Luke, my first job out of college when I graduated after being a student athlete at Wake Forest was working at the ACC office in Greensboro, and that was kind of my transition internship. And then I went to Georgia Tech. So this is bringing me back to all my days of student athlete development, because that is actually why I wanted to get into athletic administration at the college level. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at Wake Forest as a student athlete, and I grew in so many ways. But I did leave kind of feeling like I wish I had spent more time, or there were more resources or more programming put into my development in other ways as a person, in terms of my character, my brand, what I was passionate about in the community. Career aspirations, no doubt. So this gets back to my first love. And so I'm eager to hear everything from JP and Tony, and thank you guys for this opportunity. But when it comes to name, image, and likeness, so I guess there's so many levels to this and a lot that we still don't know, but I'll start with the benefits of it. The biggest thing for me that I'm excited about is that I think that this will really strengthen relationships between student athletes and their athletic departments. I mean, there's so many success stories about student athletes that either go pro or they're transition well out of their college experience, but there are many that struggle with the transition, feeling as though they spent a bulk of their time preparing for games and class to stay eligible, but not enough time really developing them as people and preparing them for life. And from what I've heard on the previous two panels, and what we will probably hear more of today through what both Anomaly does and what Altemus is doing, but also what schools like Rice and Michigan are already providing, is there will be more life education for all student athletes, which in turn, I think will create a better relationship, both short and long term, between athletic departments and their student athletes, which is extremely important. I mean, nothing is like feeling like you're cared for beyond what you can do or what you can provide. And I think that's a good feeling that student athletes will look forward to. I mean, I went to school forever ago, so I can say that, my experience, I did leave feeling unprepared and a little bitter, to be honest. But it sounds like some of the education that will happen with NIL will benefit the student athletes for sure. Now, my concern is that if we're honest, NIL is sticky for a lot of reasons. I mean, I know we're doing work to kind of figure out how the compliance side is going to look and what everyone's responsibility will be in all this. But unfortunately, we do have people who will become interested in these young adults for the wrong reasons. I also suspect that NCAA violations will rise, at least opportunities for them to. I'm particularly interested in seeing how the recruiting side of things is monitored, but that can in turn hurt some student athletes and their teams and their abilities to compete if NIL education and processes aren't in place and handled correctly. And I worry that student athletes will just have a lot more on their shoulders to deal with if the adults in charge of their experiences, both at home and on campus, aren't on the same page. So I do see some benefits to it, but obviously there are also some concerns that come along with it as well. But having been in JP's seat, sort of, when I was at Georgia Tech, I feel like as director of operations, I handled everything from academics to budget to travel, marketing, fundraising, and student athlete development was definitely something that I know takes a lot of time, JP, and you have to cover a lot of land. But I'm interested in knowing, I know it's been discussed already in the series, that NIL will level the playing field for student athletes, but what's your perspective on NIL's impact for women athletes like me, who I used to be no kind of athlete anymore, but and college athletes participating in Olympic sports?
Well, thank you for that question, LaChina. I also want to thank Anomaly and Team Altemus for the opportunity to share in this space. And I'm right there with you, right? Like, I'm in retirement, so they're beyond me. But I think in regards to your question, I want to start by saying I'm not sure if this will be the great equalizer that some of my more optimistic colleagues and counterparts are hoping for. I do think there's opportunity in the change. And as I reflect on my time as an Olympic sports student athlete and the many student athletes that I've worked with over the years, especially those in the Olympic sports, I think this gives them a greater seat at the table, especially in an Olympic year. For those third-party endorsements, that piece of it, I think there's a lot more that the students will have a stake in. I've also worked with some very entrepreneurial young women, young men, and I think just being able to see more opportunities for them to get a fair share in spaces like that of camps and clinics, or in the ownership and development of their own business, whether it's athletically related or not. I think those are some of the big wins that we have here. But with those come some concerns. And for me, my biggest concerns are about the women for sure, but then also maybe my male Olympic sports and just stemming around gender equity. They may not be compliance related or institutional integrity related, but I think it's more on the morality front. Can or should the NCAA and its membership promote an environment that rests on an endorsement or third-party system of some kind that would likely and disproportionately provide greater endorsement opportunities to male Rev Gen sport athletes? I think that's a concern. While schools won't have this institutional involvement piece, so that means there isn't a violation. I think one of the things we need to be concerned with is how does the spirit of the legislation or the proposed guardrails and structure that's in place really support any type of voice or autonomy that the female student athlete or the male Olympic sports student athletes may have. I think it's also a system where we need to think about some unintentional consequences on youth sports. Does this opportunity create some type of trickle down where we see sport participation numbers drop in Olympic sports or in female athletics, especially those sports that aren't getting a lot of opportunity when it comes to those third-party endorsements? So those are some of the things that I think about as I continue to watch the conversation develop. But at the end of the day, I think it really just boils down to two things. One would be the level of investment that the student athlete has, like their knowledge, their curiosity, their willingness to make NIL a priority endeavor for them. And then two being the support, the understanding, the investment or resources available to that institution, and even those beyond the institution, particularly like fans or consumers that would support the marketplace for that student's endeavor. So I think those are the two big pieces, but there are a lot of other pieces in this that come to play.
And we will definitely get more into that, especially marketplace. I'm glad you brought that up as this conversation goes along. But Courtney, I remember you sharing some statistics as it pertains to female athletes and how they may benefit from this in ways that I didn't realize that early research had highlighted. Can you share some of that with us?
Sure. It was the Athletic Director U and Navigate study, and they were specifically focusing on social influencers in this part of the study, but they basically determined that out of the top 25 most valuable student athletes, this is as of a few months ago, that 5 out of the top 10 were women and 60% out of the top 25 were women. So when we're speaking about that social influence piece, the women have just as much, and in some cases more, influence than their male counterparts. And then there are other situations such as the UCLA women's gymnastics team, which became such a viral hit from some of those incredible performances. They valued last year's UCLA women's gymnastics team at $1.25 million in marketability. And then I just think back to, Muffet McGraw's, I think it was 2017, 2018 team, that entire starting five went to the WNBA. So I do have great hope for women's athletics. It's not all going to be about social influence. So, that's one way of looking at it. And I do, share concerns that JP has that, it's really going to be about the student athlete deciding what their investment is going to be and how much time they want to spend on it and what the support is in the marketplace.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Someone who's a women's sports advocate, I'm always, looking at the numbers, right? And I believe right now, when we look at sponsorships of professional sports, women are getting less than 1%, which is just unbelievable, right? And so what the hope is that, and I believe this will happen, that schools will start to engage their alumni and people in the community in hopes of getting some return for their future athletes, which, who knows if they'll be able to do this in recruiting, but to offer to partner with some of their alums to offer opportunities through NIL. And I just hope that they open those doors for their women athletes as well, because I think it's important to find that balance and make them feel as included in this as everyone else. All right, so let's talk, Tony, a little bit about student athlete development for you, for a team. And JP, you can chime in on this as well. For student athlete development for an entire athletic department, what are some of your own thoughts and concerns and even feedback from current players so far about NIL? Because teams are already buzzing. Prospective student athletes are already hearing about this. So what are you getting so far, Tony?
Well, thanks, LaChina, for that question. I also want to thank Courtney, thank Luke, thank Bruce, Rashad for having me, giving me the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. As far as my take, first I start off with, I'm really excited, for student athletes. I think that that everybody kind of sees this as a step in the right direction, as far as giving student athletes the opportunity to be compensated. Like many, I think that there's a lot of questions, that I have and that I've heard, kind of expressed over the past couple months, as far as, what will this look like? How will it work? What are the rules and the regulations? And also, I think a lot of people want to know, how will this, affect the locker room? But, if within the rules, if a student athlete, has the opportunity to make, extra money, to better their lifestyle, to help support their family, to be able to put themselves in a position where, they can graduate debt-free and also have, money put aside, maybe for the down payment on a first home or to help fund grad school. These are all things that will give, one an opportunity for a great head start in life. But, overall, me personally, I'm all for, these changes because I do believe, that it empowers, student athletes. And I think that it will stir more interest in student athletes exploring areas such as entrepreneurship, marketing, finance, public relations, accounting, et cetera. So I think that, as far as the current players, it's kind of got their minds, churning a bit more and they're asking more and more questions.
Thank you, Tony. And I mean, when you think about the scope of this and what this could do for some of these young people, like my experience in college, I went to Wake Forest where, my dorm mate had a Mercedes-Benz and I could barely afford deodorant, right? And so, yeah, even as a women's sports participant, it may not look like $10,000 a semester for me. However, I would take $500 a semester if you had it, just because it would have enhanced my experience so much and would have helped me in integrating myself into a very different environment. And so whether it's a down payment on a house or, helping family, which I know, thank goodness that we have Team Altemus to help with some of the financial advising, but yeah, I mean, it could really change things. JP, what are you hearing from student athletes about what they know, what they're excited about with NIL so far?
Yeah, it's interesting to listen to Tony talk about it from an individual team perspective, because I think one of the first conversations we had as an athletic department was myself and our compliance officer at a SAC meeting. And he's explaining what's going on. And, we're talking about this discussion. And many of our Olympic sports student athletes didn't think that this was relevant to them. they didn't see this as an opportunity or even something that would have bearing on their student athlete experience at all. So, just understanding that perception and really making sure that as we continue to get more clarity on the system, knowing that that's going to be a level of education if we want to talk about equity across the department and experience that we need to focus on. I think the other piece that I think about too is just that there's more money in their hands, but what does that mean about how they get the money? The time management, who they're partnering with, who's helping them manage those deals, those people's credentials, taxes. That's something my student athletes probably don't think about enough. And so just understanding the level of education that needs to happen at a greater rate because of this situation.
I just want to chime in real quick, LaChina, because I think that point that JP made is so valid, right? In that, you have some people, if you take people who are just the average kind of consumer of news, and there's so much going on in the world right now that, sometimes some of these name, image, and likeness changes can be lost because they're still about a year out, right? But some people will look at this as saying like, oh, well, this is just something for just the elite of the elite. Only the elite athletes of the elite are going to actually be able to do anything here, and it's only going to affect them. But I think to JP's point, there are opportunities from an entrepreneurship perspective, from appearances, from trainings, from individual trainings that these student athletes across sports are going to be able to have that they've never had before. And that's going to require this additional education, right? That it's not just like saying, okay, we're going to bring in all the most elite athletes together and do this, this kind of educational training for them. No, it's going to be the fact that potentially your entire student athlete body are going to have to be educated on how do you make decisions? How do you, analyze these people who are coming at you, wanting to be around you? How do you make sure that you're not getting taken advantage of? Because again, any student athlete is going to be able to go back to their hometown, their home high school, and potentially do, a lacrosse training, right? Or do a women's field hockey training in class or camp or what have you. So that's the side of this that I think makes this a very big deal, right? That it's more than just the elite of the elite.
Yeah, which I think, Luke, and I know, Courtney, you want to have a word, but I think what that does is put some of the responsibility on maybe Anomaly Sports to come up with a curriculum that's going to reach all of those levels, right? Because I'm listening to you think, and a lot of the work I do in student athlete development as a consultant is with women's sports. And so I have things that are specifically for women, but when you sit in this room and it's, your male athletes, your female athletes could earn, $100,000, could earn 100, finding a curriculum and a way of training that impacts everyone, no matter what level you're on. And some of this onus obviously is on Tony and JP too, as it pertains to players in different classes. Curriculum and how you teach this is going to be important. Courtney, you had something to say?
I did. I was, as Luke was talking, I was thinking about a school, a Division I school that we work with. And recently we were talking about how we were going to stretch the NIL curriculum out over the next couple of semesters. And the compliance director talked to me about how, her entire men's soccer team thinks that they are musicians and they all drop tracks all the time. And now all of a sudden they think they're going to sell their music. And what struck me was, I don't think about all the possibilities. These student athletes are so creative and so ambitious, and they're competitors. So they translate that to their other interest areas. And B, there's so much easy access to being able to monetize. You can now make music and drop it and, get some help with some virtual agents who can help you do that. And so there is tremendous need for broad-based education. And I know JP, when we spoke the other day, talked about, all of the initiatives at Rice and how broad that education is and how much you're already helping your student athletes. And it's, I think that there are some programs that may just need to fill some holes. And there are some programs that need a little bit more robust programming. And it's going to take some time for the schools to figure that out.
Before we move on to our next question, Courtney, because I think you're absolutely right, and I would love to hear JP and Tony, what are you guys already doing around NIL, and how is it coming into play into what you're currently doing? Also, I did send a note to the chat for everyone. Please feel free to send questions. We will take your questions towards the end with the panel. So if you have any drop them in there. But yeah, JP and Tony, what do you guys already find yourself doing in your day-to-day around NIL?
Well, as we talked about before, I'm not sure I can call some of the stuff that we do strictly NIL curriculum. I think there are some things that I would want my student athletes to get regardless. The idea of understanding your values and the alignment with organizations or institutions that you choose to partner with beyond college, time management, decision making, that personal branding or personal presence piece. Yeah, that's a given. But and financial literacy, those are just some of the topics that I think we had already started implementing programming on, and we'll continue to do that, maybe just with tweaks relevant to the legislation that comes out about this. But those are things I would want my student athletes to have, and opportunities that I've provided for them in this space, even before NIL became as big of a topic as it is. So those are things that will continue regardless.
And Tony?
Yeah, to piggyback off what JP just mentioned, I think the biggest thing right now is just educating them, to continue to educate them, on the changes, the rules, and their rights. It's educating them on, how to protect themselves, legally, contractually, and the importance of protecting their image, whether that's in person or on social media. That's educating them on, how to make great decisions, teaching them the importances and the skills of networking. And I think as mentioned earlier, the most obvious and maybe the biggest, is the financial literacy portion, making sure that guys understand money, making sure that they understand, the importances of budgeting, saving, and investing. So I think that, just continuing, the conversation and making sure that, programming is set in stone, as far as educating our guys, is probably what's most important right now.
And sticking with you and Tony, I'd love to start with you on this in terms of conversations you're having now. Let's talk about recruiting. I mean, you lead Michigan's football high school recruiting, and JP, you're heavily involved in the process for all teams at Rice. Are families already kind of pushing, for information about NIL? And if not, how much is your program sharing and trying to get ahead of this while also balancing the fact that there's some things that we just don't know yet?
As far as pushing, I would say I don't think that many of the families are necessarily pushing, but it's certainly come up in a lot of recruiting conversations. And I think that our message as a program has been pretty simple, that we're continuing to gather information, as we receive it and formalizing our strategy. We do share with them, that given our alumni and the ties to our program and university, that we do feel really confident, that our student athletes will benefit greatly from these changes. And, we reiterate to them that we're going to do everything, within the rules to assure them that, that we're compliant, that we're providing every tool and resource available. And, that we're here to make sure that they can capitalize and to win. At the University of Michigan, we're all about empowering, educating, and protecting them and putting them in the best position for them to be successful on and off the field.
I mean, that education piece is important when it comes to the recruiting landscape on my side of things. The conversation hasn't changed too much. I mean, my pitch is usually about the opportunities that Rice can afford you in addition to the athletic and academic experiences. So, I mean, our student athlete development program is called SOAR, which stands for Student Athlete Opportunities for Advancement Through Rice Values. So really taking inventory of all of the opportunities that are available to our student athletes, both on campus. Tony mentioned our alumni base, our network, and just the geographic location of our institution. Those are all things that create a lot of opportunity. So, making sure that those opportunities for advancement take front stage or take center stage when we have a recruiting conversation, that's what my job is already. So that conversation might eliminate some of the questions that come up. When I have recruiting visits, though, I tell them always that they don't pay me to lie to you or for you. So ask those questions. And as they come up, that's great. I can either tell them what my experience is, what my answer would be, or make sure that I can do some digging and get the resources and the correct responses for them. But ultimately, it's about meeting them where they are and helping them get where they want to go. So like I said before, a lot of the focus on sharing these opportunities isn't specific to NIL, but these are things that we would want for our students regardless of this circumstance.
And just to follow up, JP, you have such robust programming as it is, which is incredible for all your student athletes. when you think about taking everything you're already offering and tailoring pieces of that to NIL, and it could be just for the sake of trying to give student athletes an opportunity to use those tools to put them to work. We all know, as you say, meet them where they are. We say that all the time. They're, 18 to 22-year-old kids. We have to validate where they are. We have to move forward with them. Practicing helps them learn things better and better. So is there a part of that programming where you see an opportunity for those student athletes to practice more now that NIL has come along, whether it be, financial literacy or networking or brand building, anything that comes to mind?
That's a great question. I'm going to take it as meaning practice those skills. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of experiential learning in the first place. I try and make sure all of our webinars, workshops, what have you, mirror what they're going to experience or mirror the athletic experience to help with that transferability of skills. So instead of just saying, let me put you through a 40-minute lecture where you learn how to do something, I'm going to make sure that you go through an exercise or that you talk about it, that you can share about it with your teammates. That may help increase the retention piece of it too. Plus that engagement work with it, make sure that they actually have to grapple with it instead of just sitting there saying, oh, JP got me, I'm good. No, I don't live with you, so that's another. But I think it's just really important to focus on that experiential learning piece, to give them an environment where it's okay to trial, to error, to fail, but ultimately to fail forward, because that's what we would want them to have the experience and expertise in when it's time for them to use those skills in the real world.
Yeah, and thank you so much. And I'm curious, Tony, especially with that one sport focus and some of the opportunities that you see that your student athletes might have, a couple of areas that you think are particularly important related to NIL?
Yeah, I think especially dealing with football players, I think that the biggest thing is probably the decision making piece, and then I think from there it is the financial literacy. I think that especially for guys in a career where they have the potential to earn 6, 7 figures. It's important to start building these qualities and these traits in them early on, so that when they do go on, to their given profession, whether that's football or not in, football, and that's the corporate setting, just making sure that we give them transferable skills, that will ensure that they'll be successful, making sure that they know, how to balance a checkbook, that they know a checking account versus savings account, that they know what, a credit card is, what a loan is, and doing the financial advisor due diligence, the agent due diligence. So really trying to give them as many tools and resources, that that in the foreseeable future that they'll be able to utilize.
Thank you so much, Tony. We have a ton of questions coming in, and I think Luke's going to do the question and answer. So for the audience, if you don't get your question asked, blame it on Luke. I'll be stepping aside for that portion of it, but a lot of
Wow.
questions, a lot of really good questions coming in, and some of my friends, hey, Katricia. Sorry, just a little shout out to you guys. All right, so back to the important people in this conversation. JP, Tony, you are both great fits for this panel for many reasons, but let's talk about what you both represent. You represent 2 different size schools, 2 different regions, but both very close to major markets in both Houston and Detroit. And shout out to Courtney and Luke for having this diversity, because I think it's so important to have schools that have different sizes and different resources kind of chiming in on this. But what do those markets you think represent in this conversation of NIL?
Yeah, so I think having, a city like Detroit in your backyard is a huge advantage. You've got GM, you've got Ford, you've got Kellogg. These are all big corporations that I'm sure understand the value, that would be brought to their company and working with, a University of Michigan student athlete. Of course, in a city like Detroit where, there's other teams that you're competing with, being the Lions, Pistons, Tigers, the Red Wings. That there'll be competition, but at the same time, Michigan's a global brand. And, like we tell our recruits and our players, you come to the University of Michigan and excel, not only are you a well-known name in Ann Arbor, but, people in Detroit know you. And not only are you a statewide name, but you're a nationwide name. And from there, it's definitely, to your advantage, just being in a city like Detroit where there's so many, different resources available to you.
JP, I know you're about to start, but Tony, as soon as you started running down all those big companies and corporations in the area, I'm like, okay, where do I sign? Oh, shoot, where's the paper? Sorry, but no, that's awesome that you have all those resources right there, and that will definitely help, I'm sure, in the conversation about opportunities, not even already with recruiting, but definitely in the future as you look at alumni connections and ways to connect with those big corporations through NIL. JP?
Yeah, I mean, it's really piggybacking off what Tony shared. For me, coming to Houston, part of the draw was the amount of professional development opportunities that I would be able to network with, to work with, to increase the expansive opportunities that our student athletes have. So, on the professional athlete side, Houston's a great sports town for that. So being able to partner with those professional sports organizations to ensure pipelines, to ensure that we're tackling some of the issues that they may see on a player development side of things, and we can work on it at the collegiate level, but then also the number of Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that are here, but also on campus recruiting on a daily basis. The big four when it comes to consulting, the medical center, which is right across the street from our campus, all of those things from a professional development side of things are great. And then to be in a big media market like we are, it's just a crazy amount of opportunities. So when I look at those on the professional side, that's one aspect of it. But even on the personal growth side for, young people from the ages of 18 to 40, Houston's a great place to be, to live. And there's stats out there. I don't have all the rankings. I know my recruiting offices do. That's a part of their presentation. But just things about quality of life in general, to be in Houston, it's a great place to be. So when we couple those things in terms of the off-campus experience and then apply that to the on-campus resources and opportunities, the size of our institution is something that I think we can leverage even more. With 40% of our alumni staying local in the Houston area, there's no secret that there are opportunities for our student athletes here. It's really easy to kind of reach across the aisle or reach beyond the hedges and bring some alumni back into the fold. And I think really just looking at the picture of all of those resources, all of those people who are willing to invest in our experience here and continue to invest in our experience, make it special.
Yeah, there was a comment in the second panel of this webinar series about whether or not alumni may cut back on their giving a little bit in terms of giving towards scholarships and donations because they will be more active in developing relationships through NIL. And that was a concern of it might have been Coach or maybe it was Clark Kellogg. I can't remember who was it that made the point, but it was a very good one and very valid one. And for smaller market schools, it's not always about where you are, but the strength of your alumni and the people that are connected to your athletic department. So not all on location. I mean, location is obviously great, but it's also about relationships that you have all the way around with your athletics and academic side. With that, we're going to take a little bit of a pause because we are getting some good questions. Luke, do you want to send through a few questions that you've picked up from the audience? You guys are active. We appreciate it. Keep them coming. Luke?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, LaChina. So a ton of questions. Feel free to keep sending them in, and we'll try to group them together because there are some similar questions. So just generally, we'll kick this one over to JP and to Tony first. And then I'd love, Courtney, your perspective as well. What methods can schools and the NCAA take to educate prospective student athletes and their families so that they have information that they need prior to arriving to campus, right? So, that there are kind of highly touted recruits that are approached in high school in all sports. And so kind of when you think about this, and there have been some other questions around family, what are you all seeing kind of as you plan for this education in terms of what are you going to do to be able to impact athletes, right from when they get on campus or even before that? And JP, we'll start off with you.
I was going to turn it over to Tony with this high school relations role, but no, I'll start. I think part of it is just kind of understanding where we are when all of these changes take effect. If students are at home or if the pandemic is still kind of limiting some of the touch points we can have, I think that virtual space may lend to more engagement with the family rather than maybe an on-campus visit and just travel around that. So I think understanding the manner in which you can share information is going to be helpful. But I think in terms of the implementation side of things, it's a collaborative approach between internal institutional related resources and then external forces. Like the answer to this or the solution to this entire situation isn't going to lie solely on the campus. So I think how people come together to put together that comprehensive package is really what's going to ultimately resonate with your families, with your students, and understanding their lifestyles so that this can be a decision that they make in the most informed manner.
Yeah, and I don't think I could answer that any better, JP. I think that, the biggest piece is, the communication. It's making sure that, that the rules and the regulations are being, communicated, to high schools and to, administrators. So I think that, the biggest thing is, you have to continue to educate, the student athletes and their parents. And the biggest thing is, probably communicating with the parents. These are kids that are 18, 19 years old. They've got, numerous other things, distractions, everything being thrown at them at the time. So I think that pipeline, as far as, communicating, with parents, continuously, updating the NCAA Eligibility Center, making sure that, that everybody knows, what the rules and what the regulations are, I think is probably most important.
Yeah, I think that's spot on in both of those responses. I think, that you have parents on campus, for Parents Weekend and for homecomings and big games and matches and things like that. And so being able to have that continuity of education, that continuity of messaging so that the family and the student athlete are getting the same kind of messaging in terms of preparation and preparing themselves for what name, image, and likeness means, I think goes a long way. Another question came in, and we're going to try to hit as many of these questions as we can, since LaChina clearly put it on me that if we don't get to them, it's my fault. So
putting you to work.
That's right. So just move over to a question that came up. I think, Courtney, you're perfectly positioned to answer this, which is, how do we protect our athletes from all the financial advisors and agents that are also going to want to profit from name, image, and likeness legislation?
Warms my heart that somebody asked that question. The answer is due diligence, and it's not just any kind of due diligence. It has to be very targeted and thoughtful due diligence around the types of advisors that are going to be coming at these families and these athletes. I think, the NCAA has brought both Team Altemus and Anomaly into their elite athlete symposiums to help those men's basketball and football players who are likely going to be drafted in the following year to transition as best as possible. And all we talk about is, Anomaly talks about decision-making, we talk about due diligence, financial advisor due diligence. And so many of them don't know the term due diligence before they come. And then once they realize that there is a process and there's a model that works, it helps them screen, it helps them educate their families, it helps level the playing field for some people who might know them, who are coming at them, telling them they can perform this function for them. I think as it relates to NIL, one of the most important things will come at, either the institutional or the conference level. I'm not sure how that will work, but there are going to be so many more people coming at these student athletes. Right now, it's mostly agents and financial advisors, but I think we're going to see marketing reps, we're going to see personal branding experts, we're going to see insurance salespeople, all coming at so many more athletes. And there definitely needs to be a process for vetting, process taught to the student athlete, and maybe even more importantly, a process for ongoing monitoring, because as we've seen in so many cases, relationships that start out well don't always stay as strong as they need to stay when these young people, when their money and their legal decisions are at hand. So there has to be a very definitive process, and it needs to apply to every single professional that could potentially come into contact with these student athletes or their families.
I love how I muted myself to ask the follow-up. So LaChina, I want to kind of kick that back over to you as well. So from your perspective, being around sports, being a former student athlete, and then just, in your position, where you've worked both institutionally, but also just being around these athletes, kind of what's your take on that, right? So many people want to be around the athlete or potentially positioned where they could take advantage. What are your thoughts on kind of what Courtney said, but also on how you kind of vet or prepare to be able to protect these athletes?
Yeah, it's a great question, Luke, and a tough job. I mean, it's amazing to me that you don't even have to be a high earning athlete, that people just want to be associated and affiliated with someone who has an elevated platform. Yeah. They want their children to be associated with them, to take pictures with them and just be around and say they met them. So I think it's going to become increasingly difficult to protect student athletes from all of these different type of potentially harmful relationships. And, family always comes back around. It's interesting. In my experience at Georgia Tech, what I found is that we could have a student athlete that comes in and, they transition in well, the freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, and then they're doing great. And senior year, it's like, well, my mom thinks A, B, and C. And all of a sudden you realize that the trust you thought you had with those student athletes is either, damaged for whatever reason, or they, maybe misunderstood something you said. I mean, any number of things could happen and or be lost in translation, but then the fallback is always the family. So I just think it's so important. And even, Luke, I know you mentioned like Parents Weekend and some of the things that happen in recruiting. I think this is going to have to go back to even camp. Like, when you think about elite camps and things, whatever type of contacts you can have even before the recruiting period, where there can be education for the families, I think it's going to have to go back to that. And it's great that Team Altemus, has a real vetting tool where they can look into the backgrounds of people and help to make student athletes, or help student athletes to make those decisions. Because I think the challenge is definitely in the trust. And I know JP spoke to where she feels like she is with her student athlete relationships, and that she can be the voice that, doesn't lie, or, she's not the coach that has to grade your performance. She's not the teacher that has to grade the paper. But I still think the student athletes tend to be a little skeptical of the athletics department, only because at some points in your career, you feel almost like an employee in a sense, right? Where it's like, I play basketball and I have to get good grades to play basketball, but where is that system of people that care about me unattached to this? And that's where I think Anomaly and Team Altemus can have a lot of success in coming in as the neutral voice, because, you're someone who the student athletes say, okay, well, they don't know me. They don't know I haven't paid my parking tickets. They don't know necessarily my family background. So let me just hear from this person who's objective, who can really help me in this space. So I think those are the two areas in terms of relationships that I think are important. Is number one, definitely the parents and the family, and making sure they're included, but also in having that neutral voice, or that third party that can come in and educate and has no other touch points with these student athletes that they see as an expert in this space.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So next question that came in, Tony, JP, this will be for you guys, and we'll go Tony first this time. How has the academic side of the higher education, faculty, advising, et cetera, how is higher education, like academics, responded to name, image, and likeness, and the name, image, and likeness concepts? And I'll just weigh in here briefly. We've talked a lot about how there are so many different stakeholder groups that kind of are involved. And when you think about recruiting, and you think about other aspects, entrepreneurship as being a key component, the idea of having practical education coming from the academic side could weigh heavily in the education and preparation for some of these athletes dealing with name, image, and likeness. So to this point, what conversations have you had, or how have they weighed in? Tony?
Yeah. So we've received a lot of interest, just from professors on campus, whether that's from the School of Law, whether that's from the business school, but, professors that have reached out and, that do want to get in front of, our team, whether that's teaching a personal finance course, or, helping them, learn, the the basics of opening and filing for an LLC. So I think that there's been a ton of support, you know, on campus, whether that's the over at the Career Center, you know, if they're, you know, allocating time, you know, that we can use with our student athletes, you know, for programming. So I think that, you know, we've received a ton of support from my colleagues, you know, that do have an interest in making sure that our student athletes do continue, you know, to develop, and that we're giving them, you know, every resource, every tool, you know, that could possibly be, you know, available to them.
Yeah, I would echo that, not even just on the faculty or academic side, but on the student affairs, student services front. You know, I know we talked about this offline, but we're in the process at Rice of implementing, or with Rice Athletics, implementing our strategic plan called Vision for Victory. And as a part of that, one of the groups that I oversee is focused on that student athlete experience, specific to student athlete development and all of the resources that need to be a part of a holistic student athlete experience. And on my committee, I have coaches, I have campus partners, I have a couple faculty members that chime in every now and then when they read an article and they're like, hey, I saw this on ESPN or on SportsCenter, what's going on? And I'm like, okay, we're fans too. I got you. Appreciate the support. So even their willingness to be a part of a conversation also shows me that they have a willingness to be a resource for our students in the classroom. And so for me, it's about how can I leverage their position, leverage their platform, and create a critical mass of people who are compliance minded so we don't end up on anybody's ticker, but also who can be informative resources to assist on this journey. And as a department of one, it really helps me when I have other people across campus who understand the athletic experience, understand the student athlete experience, and can really see where they plug in to ensure that we are meeting some of those benchmarks that we've identified that we want for all of our students.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So LaChina, this question's for you. It came in directly. It says, somebody watched your recent Title IX panel with the Women's Sports Foundation, which was, I think, last week. How do you think name, image, and likeness legislation will benefit participation in sports for Black female athletes who are currently only 21% of NCAA women's scholarships? How can we leverage this opportunity to recruit more Black female athletes?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I didn't realize I was going to be on the hot seat for questions coming in from the audience, but thank you for that. No, our panel was very enlightening around just the lack of participation and basically where Title IX has fallen short for girls of color, for those that did not know what the panel was about. And I think what the study found was in what they call majority minority schools, which are schools that are 90% or more students of color, that the participation rates for girls are lower than schools that are 90% or more white. So the disparity when it comes to white girls' participation in sport versus girls of color was just almost unbelievable when you look at the gap. But you know, I think something like name, image, and likeness could definitely help in the recruiting of girls of color. I mean, you think about the socioeconomic impacts and just that a lot of our girls of color are coming from homes that are single parent homes. I think the statistic was that girls of color are 3 times more likely to come from a single parent home than young white girls and their white counterparts. And so, you know, the one thing for my mother, when the coach came knocking at my door and said, hey, can LaChina play basketball? The encouraging aspect to her was that I was going to get a free education. Well, for some of these families, it's going to be, this is going to be an opportunity for a free education. She gets to go to college, but she also could help the family economic situation. And so, yeah, that definitely, I think, would be a benefit. And I do believe that as we see more female athletes and women of color maybe getting some chances to be marketed and to be front and center through whether it's social media or whatever, then now young Black girls have the visibility. They have that role model that they can see, because they don't see our Black female athletes right now. They don't see women at all. Only 4% of all sports media coverage is for women, and definitely lower than that for our professional athletes that are women of color. So when you think of some of those numbers, and also coupled with that only 2% in all divisions, 1, 2, or 3 of our head coaches and athletic administrators are Black women, you add more visibility that these athletes could get through name, image, and likeness, and that could definitely impact and encourage young girls of color to get involved in the sport.
Oh, that's great. So JP, question for you. Kind of how do you feel name, image, and likeness, what potential impact it could have on postgraduate opportunities at universities? So I know when you think about student athlete development, obviously you're looking at those athletes who might go pro. You're looking at athletes predominantly who are going to go and go pro in something else, or whatever the tagline is, right? And so grad school is also another one of those kind of opportunities. How do you see name, image, and likeness potentially impacting kind of the grad school aspect?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all of this really develops over time, because I think one of the things that hasn't really taken center stage on that conversation is what happens when you sign a deal of any kind with someone while you're competing. You stop competing, but you're still affiliated with an organization, and that organization's values or the way they carry themselves doesn't align with your next step. Does that create any concerns? Again, being affiliated with a specific brand and doing some things on social media, but that not aligning with your potential employer or your next journey, your next chapter. I think just helping our students understand that while they may, be thinking about this in a 3, 4, 5 time year span from their student athlete and eligibility perspective, but that these are actually long-term decisions. You've brought up in conversations before, who owns the content or who owns the intellectual property that may come out of any type of deal, and how long can that stuff be used? I think those are all things that need to be on the table when we start talking about education, because the fact of the matter is that a decision that somebody makes when they're a freshman or even a sophomore or junior in college can have 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, some interesting, I'll say the least, fallout. So what does that look like, and how are we educating our students on a more proactive front to understand the long-term impact of their experiences?
Yeah. Tony, any thoughts on that from a, kind of grad perspective?
Yeah, from one of the things that I think that I can appreciate the most about NIL is that, as I mentioned earlier, I think that it'll trigger a lot more interest in guys, possibly pursuing, secondary education, and whether that, may be an MBA or going to law school. But I think, now, they're thinking about, entrepreneurship and opening up their own businesses. It's the intellectual property side of things. I think that it'll be great, in the sense that, now guys are thinking about areas that, I say guys, but I mean no disrespect to the female student athletes as well. But I think that, now a lot more people are interested in areas that maybe they wouldn't have necessarily, considered, during their undergrad experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to do this one last question. I know, thanks LaChina for setting me up for failure, that I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions that have been asked. There's so many good questions.
You've done well. You've done well.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know that we're going to be able to jump, and share kind of our contact information, all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to take a quick stab at this question, and I'm going to kick it over to Courtney to kind of put a bow on that, if you will. And there's kind of two questions kind of combined into one. It's this idea of what would be the best way to educate student athletes, financial literacy, legal implication, taxes, personal branding, everything that was mentioned here today, on the whole, when institutions may not have people in place to intelligently speak on such varying issues. And this follow-up question that also came in around how does name, image, and likeness potentially impact staffing? And would there be a dedicated person overseeing kind of contracts and education and stuff? So try to wrap that up into two. And my thought on that is a couple things. It has to be a practical, real world educational opportunity, right? And JP talked about experiential, and student athletes need it. They need to see how the education like really applies to them, right? So when we start talking about the impact that other academic professors might be able to have in name, image, and likeness, in my mind, it makes it real, right? It makes the academic side real for the player when you take a class on, digital storytelling or marketing, through social media or what have you. But also the things that Courtney and I do, myself through Anomaly and Courtney with Team Altemus, it's really about how do we make it real for these student athletes, right? I mean, kind of that's kind of the bottom line. So when I look at the whole idea of educating around contracts, understanding what agreements you're signing with a marketing agent or a branding person or what have you, like, can you get out of those contracts? Like, what does it mean? We use real world opportunities, real world experiences to make it real. And when players understand that you're coming to them with real education from a real practical perspective, they're much more tuned in because they know that it's something that they very well might experience themselves. And so I do think that making it a very practical and real world education is critical. And also, when you think about it, there are going to be different universities are going to take the approach of some are going to hire people specifically for name, image, and likeness. Others might not due to budgetary constraints or what have you. But it's going to take a village, like we talked about. It's going to take your individual team folks like Tony. It's going to take your broad athletic department folks like JP. It's going to take independent outside folks like Courtney and myself, and academic folks as well, to all come in together to help make sure that the student athlete is protected and taken care of.
Yeah, no question, Luke. I will absolutely reiterate and agree with it takes a village. And I think that every school, every program is different. And we're in the midst of a pandemic. We're in the midst of budgets being cut, uncertainty. I think first and foremost for all of the programs, everybody needs to do just an evaluation of what they have. First, what they need, and then look internally, see what they have and what resources they need to reach outside for. It's probably going to take a couple years to go through that process to really find what works. But I'll go back to what Seth said in the first episode. Somehow, some way, they can't afford not to do this. And, you know, we're developing less expensive access to some of our programming as quickly as we can to make sure that every student athlete gets access to it. But I also do think the third party piece is huge. It's why schools bring us in now, and we can be, as I said before, last week or the week before, the good guy or the bad guy. We've seen it all. You know, I was on Wall Street for a couple decades, and I took many athletes from rookie to retirement. And it's why I started the business, because I knew they needed somebody who has experience, who's totally impartial to help. You know, Luke, you're a practicing attorney. You bring in this unbiased experience. My business partner, Rashad, you know, he was a 3-time All-Ivy League at Cornell and went and worked at a private debt and equity firm. He was an undergrad much more recently than I was, and also a student athlete, and he can really relate to student athletes today. And his brother's currently playing in the NFL. So I think that the relatability piece is huge. Experiential learning. Any group that we work with, they're not in their seats for 2 minutes. As soon as we start, we get them up and we get them moving. Get them moving virtually now on webinars. But you know, the true experts who are unbiased, who are able to be trusted, who aren't going to judge, who are going to meet them where they are, and who are relatable and able to teach in a way that's going to help give these student athletes experience.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, this has been yet again another Monday that races by with the with our 1 hour time. But absolutely just wanted to say thank you so much to our panelists, JP and Tony. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspectives and your experiences with us. My fellow Demon Deacon, LaChina, always good to see you, and thank you for moderating with us today. Yeah, and Courtney, I'll turn it over to you.
Just want to thank everybody. Reminder that we'll be back in the fall with another webinar to talk compliance, hopefully after we get a little more information about what these rules might ultimately look like. Remember my favorite thing to say, hashtag DDMC, decision-making, due diligence, money, and contracts. Everything outside of branding, it's that easy. And you can reach out to us at Team Altemus is team-altemus, ALTEMUS.com, and Luke with Anomaly.
Yep, Anomaly Sports Group. It's just anomalysportsgroup.com. Feel free to check us out at Luke Fedlam on social media. But again, thank you all so much. And yes, Courtney, it's been a joy being with you the past 3 Mondays. I don't know what I'm gonna do next Monday from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Maybe not have a suit on, so that'll be good. But thank you again. Thanks for everybody for joining in, and thank you, JP, Tony, and LaChina for all that you brought to the conversation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.